And welcome back to the Sonia News Show, to the Sonia Poulton Show on TNT. And how are you today? I am delighted to be joined by, well, one of my favorite type of people, an insider and a whistleblower. You can't get better than that. This is Hedley Rees. Hedley Rees is the managing director at PharmaFlow Limited. It's a UK-based consultancy which specializes in supply chain pharmaceuticals and to the life science industries. His previous appointments have included senior positions at Bayer UK, British Biotech, Vernalis, Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, and OSI Pharmaceuticals. He's also an author, and he's here with us today. Welcome, Hedley. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Sonia. It's nice to speak to you again. I always enjoy these conversations we have, and I'm ready to sort of tell you what you need to know.
Well, I love that. That's my kind of language, Hedley. So tell me, first of all, obviously we've talked plenty of times in the past, and you have been raising the alarm since the get-go. You've been concerned throughout the COVID period, and you've been shouting loud about it, not least about how compromised so much of government is, pharmaceuticals. But tell me, why have you been so outspoken and troubled about the COVID vaccines?
Well, the first thing I should say is I was a thought leader in the industry. I wrote a book, Supply Chain Management in the Drug Industry for Wiley in 2011. You can see it behind my head there. And I was known as a modernizer, wanted to change things so that the industry worked like other sectors where they put their customers first and they had a strategic approach to supply chains. And I was very well known. And what I was saying was the industry didn't like, but I was able to say it because they knew I was right. So when COVID came along, the first thing that struck me was that they were, and when I say they, I mean Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, not AstraZeneca, but the frozen vaccines. They were shipping vaccines into vaccination centers at minus 70 degrees C or minus 20 degrees C for untrained, unqualified people, willing and able, but unqualified, to do the final manufacture. So throwing vaccines is manufacture. It comes under strict regulations that have to be followed. People have to be trained. They have to have standard operating procedures. They have to work to a quality system. These were sterile injectables. And it's well known that you cannot even test a sterile injectable to prove it's sterile. It has to be manufactured at every stage under sterile conditions. So even a test wouldn't tell you if that vaccine was safe to put in the patient. As it happened, there were no tests anyway. So that was the red flag that appeared straight away. But of course, on top of that, the time scale was unbelievably, it wasn't just quick, it was suicidal. This rolling review that they used only looked at the clinical time frame. The main rate determining step with vaccines or any biologic or small molecule product is the supply chain. How it works that you make a very small quantity, 10 kilos, 10 liters, and you tested it only in animal models. But it has to be, you have to test what the supply chain produced. It's no good getting something tested in the lab if it wasn't actually what was produced. And if you can prove that safe, and it normally takes about 3 years, then you can go into studies in humans. And for studies in humans, you have to work to very tight quality standards. It takes a long time. It's called good manufacturing practice and good distribution practice. And typically to go through all the stages of clinical trials from phase 1 to phase 3 takes about 7 years, because then you have to prove that the drug that's being manufactured is properly tested for safety. And if you increase the scale from 10 kilos to 50 kilos, you have to repeat the safety testing at that scale. You can't just say, well, it was safe at 10 kilos, so it's going to be safe at 50 kilos, because the molecular structure can change. and none of that was taken into account when they scaled up. So it's highly likely that these drugs would have what they call polymorphed into a different drug and could well have caused injury for sure and deaths as well. So,
let me just stop that there, Hedley, because this is so serious what you're saying. We are just going to go to the news headlines, but we will be right back with Hedley Rees. This is unmissable.
TNT Radio News.
I've got news for you, baby. I've got news for you, baby.
News.
Matt Boyland here with a quick look at your TNT headlines. Tensions over border security are threatening to explode in the US as red state governors start mobilising support behind the state of Texas. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has hit out at Israel, calling its rejection of a two-state solution unacceptable. And Hungary has announced it's ready to ratify Sweden's NATO membership. It comes after Turkish lawmakers voted to approve the country's accession on Tuesday.
Are you enjoying listening to TNT Radio?
Do you think we're doing a good job?
Then please let us know. Why not leave us a like or a positive review or comment on Facebook, Gab, or Getter? Help us get the word out as we cover the biggest topics of our time on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Welcome back to TNT. I'm talking with Hedley Rees. This is a fascinating conversation. Hedley is telling us that basically the pharmaceuticals absolutely knew that these COVID-19 jabs were not really fit for humans, right, Hedley?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Shocking stuff. Now, I want to look at how compromised our government is with regards to the big pharmaceutical giants. And we know they are, but you've been uncovering loads of information. I highly recommend Hedley's Substack. I think it's your Substack, isn't it, Hedley? And it's one of the things that you've definitely been diving deep on is how GlaxoSmithKline and the government vaccine task force are linked. Tell us more.
Right. Okay. Well, I've had to go back to 2001 when the government formed the Ministerial Industry Strategy Group, which was basically a meeting with pharmaceutical companies, no other industry sector. And at that first meeting was chaired by the CEO of AstraZeneca, the CEO of AstraZeneca of vaccine fame. On the committee also was Sir Richard Sykes, who was then the chief executive of Glaxo. So Glaxo subsequently merged with Wellcome to become Glaxo Wellcome, and then it merged with SmithKline Beecham to become GlaxoSmithKline. Sir Richard Sykes masterminded both of those mega mergers, $70-80 billion mergers. He was at this first meeting in 2001, and the minutes are on the in government archives. And the conversation was really with government. Look, pharmaceutical industry, if you can help us get up the life sciences pole so that we are number one in the world, we'll both benefit. That was, if you summarized it, that's what it was. And they met every year from 2001 onwards, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. And in 2012, 2013, I became part of this because I helped the Office for Life Sciences get a UK Advanced Manufacturing Supply Chain grant for a company in Oxford called Oxford Biomedica. They had a £7.1 million grant that I helped them get. I had a little bit of interchange with government after that, but then I left the scene because Oxford Biomedica basically fired me and government didn't want me. But they kept, and Oxford Biomedica was a gene therapy company, still is a gene therapy company. And I didn't think a lot more about it. But then when all this talk about gene therapies being, the big thing and number one in the world, I thought, gosh, what's been going on? And then we had the whole COVID thing. So Oxford Biomedica manufacture the drug substance. This is the adenovirus cell-modified, they're basically liquids where they've done a genetic modification to chimpanzee cells so that it can help the body make these spike proteins. So it's a slightly different technology to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. I call them vaccines, but the effect is the same. Is the same thing. So instantly, I knew that was still. I'd seen the process. I'd seen, I knew the company. I knew they were not able to manufacture these injections safely because they weren't at that level of maturity, if you like. The whole industry is very early stage, very experimental, and it was obvious that what they were doing was just pushing these. They converted the gene therapies that were on the market, because Oxford Biomed make Kymriah what they call a CAR T therapy, a blood cancer therapy for Novartis, which FDA approved in 2017. They haven't sold because that particular therapy is $500,000 for one to treat one patient. None of these blood cancer therapies have been selling, and now FDA have just put a warning on them to say they are potentially carcinogenic. So
This
that's
is
going
so
to be
troubling.
a big hole in the whole thing.
This
so
is so
they converted.
troubling.
Well, absolutely. So in the absence of a market, they converted these gene therapies into vaccines on the basis that why not?
Well, I can. We know a million reasons why not, but you've pointed out other very serious compromises that are taking place here. So, for example, Sir Jonathan Simons, who was appointed chair of the board at GlaxoSmithKline in September 2019, he has also been made an economic advisory council member by the British government. So that's really troubling, and one has to wonder what is going on here. And I want to take things slightly darker, if I may, here, Hedley, and you've certainly gone there in your writings, and that is about a depopulation agenda. Is there any truth or veracity to the idea that that is what is taking place here?
I don't believe that. I see that almost as a diversionary tactic. So, and there's a lot of debate on this. But why would billionaires want to kill most of their market for the products that they charge in very high prices for? The depopulation agenda, right, they don't care who they kill, that's for sure. They don't care that they have contravened all the regulations and the safety checks and balances when you manufacture drugs, that's for sure. But I think this agenda is about making mega bucks. Because Pfizer made $80 billion in the first year. Now, they've made that by selling these vaccines to the population. So I'd ask the simple question, if they kill 90% of the population, who are they going to sell their drugs to? There's common sense tests. And that argument is very US-centric, and we know the US was very different to the UK and Europe. In the UK, Bill Gates taken everything over. He hired the head of the chief executive of MHRA, Ian Hudson. He has been the linchpin with the regulators in approving these injections, even though they haven't been properly reviewed and evaluated by experienced regulators. We know the European Medicines Agency raised concerns. Those concerns were raised by what you would call the supply chain people, the people who knew there were issues with this. They raised the concerns and they were just stamped out. And those concerns still exist. And the UK has gone even further. It's now made it okay for hospitals to make these gene therapies themselves in a hospital pharmacy or in some other capability. I've got the evidence. You can see behind me there, the MHRA good manufacturing and distribution practice regulations for what they call these advanced therapies, which are gene therapies or advanced therapy medicinal products. Hospital pharmacies can now manufacture them themselves without any recourse or any quality system or any skills, because they haven't been built in this. I mean, if I've always said we should be making in hospitals, that should be an endpoint, that should be a target, because it's much closer to the patient. But you have to transfer in the skills, the competencies, the equipment, and that whole thing before you do it. And that's the next book I'm writing for Wiley, which will be out in the summer, which is called Transforming the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain, which will be an academic publication, 300 pages in color, to inform doctors, lawyers, investors in how you could develop the supply chain so that this industry becomes like other industries, like the airline industry, where they have to observe proper safety standards.
Sounds fair enough to me. Listen, I want to say I thank you very much for joining us today. It's always much appreciated. I love how candid you are. Everybody, this is Hedley Rees. He is, well, as I say, an insider, a whistleblower, and somebody who knows his stuff. Don't go away. We will be right back.